by going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us about our creation, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي خَالِقٌ بَشَرًا مِّن طِينٍ فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِن رُّوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse says, when your Lord said to the angels, I have made a creation, a human, out of clay. And when I have proportioned it and breathed into it a spirit from me, then fall down unto it prostrate. So in this verse in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us something about our nature. That we are both a physical being as well as something other than the physical. We have the teen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions explicitly the teen. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about breathing the ruh. And happiness for the human being is going to start understanding this point and understanding the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, the information that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the creation of human being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us about the enemy that existed at that time, and the enemy for the human being that has been given respite and shall join us and be with us. And this, of course, I'm talking about a shaitan. And a shaitan's enmity for human beings is so great that all that he can think about is to bring about misery to the human being. And he does this in many ways. And one of the most important ways that a shaitan does this is by clouding the person's thinking and his understanding of reality. And in each generation or in each century, in each era, a shaitan comes with new ways to make people deviate from what they are actually all about. And I don't know how many of you here are members of ICNA, an organization for engineers and whatnot. In the June 2008 issue of the Spectrum, they had an issue devoted to what is known as the singularity. And these are serious scientists, serious engineers, speaking about the fact that the brain is in reality nothing more than a machine and a complex computer. In fact, one of the articles is entitled, I, Rodney Brooks, am a robot. By Rodney Brooks. I have that in my notes, that it's by Rodney Brooks. I made sure to write down who wrote I, Rodney Brooks is a robot. And he says, the thing that I have concluded in my 30 years of research is that me, you, and everyone, we're nothing but machines. And they even think that they can get to the point that they can map the brain completely. They can map the brain completely. Basically what they're saying is everything that goes on in your conscious is nothing but physics and chemistry and biology, nothing but cause and effect, and they can reproduce it. They can master it. And they say, by the way, if they can master it, then there should be nothing that should keep them from being able to take this and put it into steel and put it into silicon. And these are serious scientists today talking about taking your soul, what we would call your soul, and putting it into a computer so that you can live on after your body dies out. And this, by the way, some of them clearly refer to it as living happily forever. Those who are kind of against the idea, they refer to it as a kind of nirvana for the geeks. But anyway, But it's interesting, by the way, when you read what these people have said. At no point in any of their papers that they presented or in the papers that came before it, there's two things that stand out. Number one, they deny that there's anything otherworldly related to the soul or related to the human being. It's all just physical matter that we can study and look at and understand. And by the way, when they say this is no longer science. They are making their own claims about their own beliefs. Sometimes even some Muslims fail to recognize what's the difference between science and just claims that people are making. So this is one aspect that they claim. And secondly, they never speak about the fact that if I am nothing but a machine, and there's really nothing special about my soul, then if I'm having a bad day, or if things are really going bad, why don't I just commit suicide? If my body is getting old, I'm getting Alzheimer's, or if we know people are getting Alzheimer's, why don't we just throw them away? Go to any junkyard, and you find it filled with all sorts of machines that people throw away. Sometimes just last year's computer. But they do not say this. Instead, they are still seeking for something. They're still seeking for that forever happiness, even when they say we're nothing but a machine. Because deep down, and now this is my theory, I'm not quoting them, but I'll tell you, this is my theory about them. My theory about them is that deep down they realize there is something. There is a purpose. There is something beyond just the physical that we are dealing with here. And this recognition, or this fact that they cannot get beyond this recognition, this has to do with that fitrah, that natural disposition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created in every human being, to recognize the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to realize what his relationship is supposed to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ has told us that every child is born upon this fitrah. ما من مولود إلا يولد على الفطرة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the fact that actually He's going to make them bear witness on the Day of Judgment, that they recognize that He is their Lord. And I'm not going to get into that verse very much because most people have a misunderstanding about it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell them on the Day of Judgment that they bore witness to the fact that they recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their Lord. And this recognition that we are a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and of only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have only one master, one Lord. This is an important step for the happiness of an individual. And then after that comes the fact of realizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this great creator, is not going to create things just without any purpose, batil, abath, but instead Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us with a purpose. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I created not jinn and mankind except to worship me. So then we move on to recognize the fact that we not only have a purpose, but actually we have the noblest purpose there could ever be. To be true servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To be devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is actually what our soul is striving for. This is what our soul is yearning, is looking for. And as long as the soul doesn't recognize this, or even as long as the soul does not recognize it properly or completely, there will always be some unhappiness in their life. But if the soul recognizes it properly, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised to give that soul a good life. As in the verse that our brother mentioned, مَنْ عَمِلَ صَالِحًا مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَلَنُحْيِيَنَّهُ حَيَاةً طَيِّبَةً وَلَنَجْزِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْرَهُم بِأَحْسَنِ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Whoever does righteous deeds, whether male or female, while a believer, we shall certainly give them a good life. And as many of the Mufassirin said, and as clear from the context, we'll actually give them a good life in this world. And then we shall certainly grant them their rewards in accordance with their deeds, talking about the hereafter. So this good life, this happiness, this is the result of Iman, of being a believer, and acting properly on that belief. It is not the result, as our brother said, of the worldly things of this life. Although as growing up, when kids, we used to always say that happiness can't buy money, but that's another issue. Happiness can't buy money. No, you people, you older people would say money can't buy happiness, but we young people used to always say that happiness can't buy money. But the Prophet ﷺ actually spoke the truth and has told us very clearly. The Prophet ﷺ told us, لَيْسَ الْغِنَاء عَنْ كَثْرَةِ الْأَرْضِ وَلَكِنِ الْغِنَاء غِنَى النَّفْسِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, true richness is not via an accumulation of goods, but actually it is via the richness of the soul. And when the person begins to understand these things, and when the person gets closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and dedicates his life to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we can see from many of those ulama who came before us, there is a change in their lives. Like Ibn Taymiyyah, for example. His student Ibn al-Qayyim quoted him many times saying different things. One of the things he said, for example, is, what can my enemies do to me when my Jannah, my paradise, is in my chest, it's in my heart, it's in my Iman? What can they do to me if I have Iman in my heart? If they want to torture me, if they want to take all that they can of this dunya from me, they cannot touch my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is beyond their means. They can never get to that. And so if the individual has that, he has actually a treasure. One of the early scholars said, actually, if the sons or if the rulers and the kings and the wealthy people knew what we had, they would fight us for it with their swords. If they knew this real pleasure, if they knew what we had. In fact, one of them even said that sometimes I feel that if the people of Jannah are experiencing what I'm feeling, then they are in a good state. And this is what happens when this Iman really enters into your heart. And you can experience it. And inshallah, hopefully many of you have experienced it. For example, when you go to the mosque and you stand up for the salat, or you look at yourself sitting in the mosque waiting for the prayer, and you get this feeling coming over you that this is where you belong. This is what it's all about. This is what my soul is looking for. You know, sometimes, unfortunately, some people experience this after they've committed sins. You know, they spend some place, or they spend some time maybe doing something haram, doing something that they shouldn't have been doing. And then when they come back to the mosque, when they come to the salat, when they start the fast, then they realize, what nonsense was I doing? All of that I was doing, either for this dunya or for pleasures or whatever, it means nothing. This is where I want to be. This is how I want to be. But the key is not to have that feeling just after you commit the sin, but the key is to develop your iman and your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala such that you are living in that state. You know, there's a passage in the Quran. Actually, there's a phrase in the Quran that we find more than once that I think we should really reflect upon. And for example, we find it in this verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالسَّابِقُونَ الْأَوَّلُونَ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ وَعَدَّ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي تَحْتَهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا أَبَدًا ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking about the early believers of the Muhajirin and the Ansar and those who follow them in faith and doing goodness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with them and they are pleased with Him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised them paradise, gardens in paradise wherein they will live forever. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is talking about their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here. Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Reflect upon what does it mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying they are pleased with Allah. What does that mean? To be pleased with the creator of the universe, your creator, your master, the one you want to submit to. If you have a boss at work and you're very pleased with your boss, it brings so much happiness to you. But if you can make that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, imagine how you would be living in this life. And as I said, this is what the soul needs. And it can only come about through the proper iman, the proper relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many people, through many ways, by the influence of shaitan or whatever, they may try to deny it. They may try to fool themselves. But in reality, they can never do it. Think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used the word kafir for the disbeliever. And the root meaning of the word kafir, what it's talking about is, for example, a farmer. You can refer to a farmer as a kafir. I hope there's no farmers in the crowd. They may not like that. A farmer is a kafir because he puts seeds into the ground and then he covers those seeds. This is what kufr is, to cover. He covers those seeds. And these people who are turning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they may be seeking happiness in whatever ways, but in reality, they are doing nothing but covering what is in their own nafs, in their own soul, in their own heart. And so therefore they will always be, no matter how happy they may claim or whatever, and especially when they meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will always be in misery. But the one who recognizes what that fitrah is, what his soul is all about, he can inshallah grow in that iman, and he will have pleasure in this life that is unimaginable for those people who simply have not experienced or do not really know what their ulama, what their scholars are even talking about.